Call back to order, and I'll invite the Deputy Sergeant to bring in the witness.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sean Glidden. Mr. Chris, can you bring me the piece of paper, please? Are you going to give evidence directly, or you're only going to be supporting Ms. Peggy Hamilton? Is he going to be giving evidence himself, or?
Whatever is needed.
Okay. In that case, I need you to repeat after me.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence that I shall give.
To this honorable legislative assembly.
To this honorable legislative assembly.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Peggy Hamilton, let me take the opportunity to thank you for making yourself available to the Public Accounts Committee. And you would have been informed that today we're looking at the annual reports of the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center Limited for the years 2017, 2018, and 2019. And for both of you, Mr. Glidden as well, the first question you answer, just give your full name and your title so that it is recorded in the Hansards. Okay. Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, on behalf of the committee, want to thank the witnesses for attending this hearing on the annual reports for 2017, 18, and 19 for the Cayman Turtle Center. I only have one or two questions for the witnesses, but I think perhaps to the chagrin of some of my other members, I'm going to start out with some compliments as represented by these annual reports, which I think whilst we can appreciate where the Turtle Center has come from, we must also pause to recognize how far they have come. And I think that's important for the public record at the very least. We see by 2018 that the Turtle Center had paid off its bank loan. The following year, it paid off its remaining debt and is now debt-free. We see that the Turtle Center by 2019 has been improving on its overdraft year on year, decreasing by more than $1 million. We see the annualized expenses for 2016 to 2018 decrease, albeit increasing slightly in 2019, and I suspect with COVID, we can probably expect a little bit of the same in 2020, but you're free to surprise me. We see annualized revenue also being based primarily on, by 58% admissions. And again, that's why I say with the impact of COVID, we will expect to see quite a difference in the revenue and expenses column. But I think overall, the dependence on the government's capital contributions has halved, getting less. And we see shareholder equity increasing both by 6.4% in 2018 and again by 15.4% in 2019. I think all of those things are very, very positive financials, and I want to congratulate the team, Ms. Peggy and Mr. Sean, on our behalf. Ms. Peggy, just a question specifically. I wonder how you see your role and the responsibilities of your role as Chief Operating Officer, particularly against the backdrop that we learned earlier on from the CEO, that the responsibilities of Chief Financial Officer are somehow embedded in your responsibilities as Chief Operating Officer. How do you see your role, and specifically, how do you see your role separately from Mr. Glidden's role as Finance Manager?
Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the question. My name is Peggy Hamilton, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center. With regards to my role, I'm on the executive level, so I'm a chief along with 5 other executives, including the CEO. And how I see my role is the oversight of corporate services in general, so I am responsible for all the finance, accounting matters, HR, IT, and administration. And I do absorb the CFO role inherently because I do have oversight of finance and accounting. So I am performing that role as well and have a very active role within all the financial matters and preparing for the audits.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, through you, just a follow-up. We see from the Auditor General's findings that some of the going concerns financially of the center have been cost overruns, minimal internal controls, which would otherwise seek to protect the organization from some of the pitfalls that have at least been alleged, and the need, particularly whilst we expect revenue to decline and not to see the center fall back into a debt-laden era, now having come through that. What sort of cost-saving measures will you or have you since implemented as part of your participation in the organization? What internal controls, as highlighted as missing, what gaps, as highlighted by the Auditor General's roles, have been filled, and what sort of cost-saving measures can we expect to see from the Turtle Center going forward?
Thank you. With regards to internal control improvements, since I joined in January of 2018, we've certainly tightened the restrictions around cash. So our protocols now are there always has to be 2 sets of eyes on every stage of the cash. So even from going from the office to go pick up at the drop safes every day from the 3 revenue centers, there has to be 2 people. Everything is recorded as it's lifted out of the drop boxes and signed off by both people. We have an accounts officer who's responsible for reconciling the POS to the cash. That's done daily. We also have an armored service that's picked up twice a week, or depending on the frequency and need for cash. And we've also added an extra position to the finance team, and that was needed because there was a gap between the accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the finance manager. So we have an accounts officer who's now responsible for digging into the GL, consistently reconciling all the accounts and doing the bank recs on a regular basis. With regards to the cost savings, so I've been really monitoring everything within my remit, so everything under IT, everything under human resources, administration, and accounting to try to streamline wherever I could. And since COVID hit, in the last couple of months, myself, along with another executive, have formed a cost efficiency team. So we have a team of managers that we get together regularly, and we looked at every area of the business of where we can improve and find cost efficiencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, whilst we believe that it is important to obviously compensate your team properly, motivation, etc., all attached to it, we have noticed that the cost associated specifically with salaries has increased, I think, by a margin of 19% year on year. The Auditor General also, in her report, acknowledged that there seemed to be an absence of some salary standardizations across the board. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, that 19% increase on salaries, justified or otherwise, but also more importantly, how does it play a role in those salary standardizations that is expected across the board?
Okay, thank you. With regards to the 19%, in December the 1st, 2018, the board approved a new pay policy guide. So we looked at our current salary scales and we revamped them, and this was in consultation with Deloitte as part of the organizational structure, looking at how to set up a job evaluation committee. It was all part of that study that they undertook. So part of it was the reorganization of the company. The other part was the pay policy guide that was implemented with the new salary scales. And this was all in accordance, as far as we are aware, with Section 48 of the Public Authorities Law, subsection 2. And then with regards to the statement in the audit, that it's in regard to the Public Authorities Law, Section 47, in which we have all government departments will be on their same salary scale. So we've been working alongside the portfolio of the Civil Service, and we've provided all the job descriptions and all the documentation that they needed. And they've informed us that the consultant has now been hired, and the work done to compare the two salary scales and make recommendations will commence early 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witness.
You said that the salary adjustments were made in December 2018 with the board approval based on the Deloitte consultancy report.
The Deloitte consultancy report helped us create a job evaluation committee, which allowed us to then develop a new salary scale based on points. The salary scale, some of the recommendations that they did, well, we took it and then looked at it between myself and the HR manager and the CEO and came up what we thought were fair salary scales based on the methodology suggested. And this pay policy guide was then presented to the board in November 2018 and approved to be implemented December 1st, 2018.
And you say, as far as you all are aware, that was done in accordance with the Public Authorities Law?
Correct. We are following Section 48, subsection 2.
Okay, which is the section that says you got to have cabinet approval for increasing salaries and stuff like that?
The subsection 1 of that says you need cabinet approval for all cost of living adjustments. Subsection 2 said it's not required for individual salary adjustments, which is the one that we're following.
Okay, but you regard your multiple organizational and resetting of salary scales as individuals, not a collective thing that would require cabinet approval?
The way it was implemented, yes, by points and by position. So we looked at it as an individual, knowing that we were in the process of completing the exercise with the portfolio of civil service to then abide by Section 47.
Have there been any salary adjustments since December 2018?
Only in accordance with our pay policy guide that was approved by the board of directors.
And what is that pay policy guide? Is there some link to cost of living, or what is it a link based on performance appraisals, or what is the guide?
It is based on performance appraisals. There's a number of different areas that can be addressed through for change in salary. One of them is through the performance. But because of the financial year, we also have it in our pay policy guide that if we didn't meet our budget and cash flow was tight, then we reserve the right to not have that increase as well.
Okay, when you are making judgments as to whether your cash flow is tight or not, is it fair to say that the reason you have achieved the pay down of your debt is because of equity injection directed by government for that specific purpose?
Most of that was prior to my arrival. I've only arrived in January 2018, so I can only speak from 2018 and 2019 with regards to
But
this meeting.
the subsidy given to the turtle farm in 2018, 2019 was also a subsidy for operational expenses as well as debt service.
Correct, for both years, debt
So
service and operational.
You are not currently generating revenue to cover your expenses.
Not currently, based on the COVID-19 pandemic.
No, I mean, no,
Yeah.
COVID, as we're talking 2019, 2018.
Correct, yes,
So in 2018 and 2019, you did not have sufficient revenue to cover your operational expenses, so you needed government subsidy.
correct,
Because the government subsidy was more than the debt servicing in both of those 2 years.
correct.
Okay. What initiatives have you put in place to try and improve revenue, not necessarily to expand the areas of revenue, but to enhance the collection or collecting the cost of those areas? Because if you're falling short to the point where you need government subsidy for your operation expenses, my layman question would be, well, your pricing must be wrong for some of these things if you're not generating the revenue to cover the expenses.
Yeah, we are looking at that, and we've actually made some price adjustments. That falls under the responsibility of the Chief Tours and Customer Experience Officer. So he's the one in charge of all the admission pricing and the contracts with the cruise lines. But he has increased all admissions, but of course we're waiting for the resumption of the tourism.
We've had some cash management problems in the past, and I think that your answer to Mr. Austin indicate that you've put in place sufficient checks and balances now to prevent that from happening in the future, or at least be able to recognize if it's happening. What have you done on the procurement side in terms of introducing levels of control for procurement, and who signs off and what are the dollar values?
Okay, on the procurement side, our limitation or table of authorities internally working for managers, they can sign up to 5,000 CI, but our internal policy is anything over 1,000 has to be with 3 quotes. It has to be a budgeted item as well to reach the 5,000. Anything that is not budgeted has to be with my approval and the Chief Executive Officer. The chief officers, the different executives have a assigning authority of 10,000 CI. Again, it has to be budgeted. And then for anything over that amount, I can approve up to 50,000 with the CEO's approval. And for the procurement side, we follow the procurement law. So we have an entity procurement committee, of which I am the chair, and we look at all the different steps, and we have our procurement manual. We also took away the ability. There was once an ability for a lot of managers to be able to raise a PO through our financial system, and we've narrowed that down so only 2 administrative assistants can raise the PO. That same administrative assistant cannot set up a new vendor, and a new vendor cannot be set up unless we have a trade and business license first.
Okay. So, and this existed in 2018, 2019, these sign-off levels?
In 2018, these sign-off levels were implemented, yes.
Okay. So for any large procurement, the CEO would have to sign off on it?
Well, we always had we used to call it a tenders, I'm trying to remember the exact name, but like a tenders committee.
Mm-hmm.
That got switched in this year to the entity procurement committee. So even for capital expenditures, the CEO wouldn't sign it off unless there was an entire committee that met and discussed it and approved it.
Okay. Mr. Glidden, what is your position?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Sean Glidden, Finance Manager of the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center.
And you are a qualified accountant. You have a what's your accounting qualification? CPA, CA, ACC, or what?
Mr. Chairman, I hold 2 bachelor's degrees, one in finance and the other one is in administration.
So you're not a professional qualified accountant?
No, sir.
Okay. Chris, you want to take over now? Well, I just have one more question. The CEO indicated in his evidence that you now have the ability to calculate profits and loss from various cost centers, like the shop, the scientific side. Is there any entity within the turtle farm that is making money, that has a profit?
Right now, it's the retail business because we are getting a lot of support from the locals and they're actually covering their costs. So the retail is the only center right now.
Okay. One other question on the procurement. The supplier for turtle feed is been the same supplier for a long, long time. I believe the new procurement legislation requires you now to tender that. Is there any, or are you going to take the option in the procurement law of a single source supplier, or are you going to tender it?
It's already tendered. It's gone through our entity procurement committee, and I've sent it on through for the public procurement committee to put it on their agenda for December.
How many bidders did you have?
One.
Pardon? 1 to 1?
Only one, which we were surprised.
And you all consider that a successful tender?
No, we don't, unfortunately, but we were told anecdotally when we asked was that it was because of the whole COVID-19 pandemic that other feed mills that were going to bid ended up picking up more business because other ones, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, didn't have workers and they became overworked and over capacity. So that's anecdotal, but I don't know if that's true or not. But we only have one bidder.
In your professional judgment, do you think it needs to be retendered? Because
I put it forward to the entity procurement committee, and there was a quorum present at that, which are 3, and the committee agreed to put it forward to the public procurement committee for their review because it was over 250,000 threshold anyway. But the recommendation from the entity procurement committee was to put it through to the public procurement committee with the one bidder.
But what is the public procurement committee going to decide if you only have one bidder? Are you just asking them to comment on the process?
Well, they have to give approval, and I haven't been present at a public procurement committee meeting, so I'm not sure of what level of discussion takes place, or I'm not sure on that process.
Through Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank the witnesses for attending here today. Just out of curiosity, the food and beverage servers, roughly what do they get paid per hour?
It depends on the position, but the servers are approximately 11 something. Line cooks are around $15, and of course they get gratuities on top of that, plus all their benefits and pension, health insurance.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the things naturally that jumped out, and I know that we have to probably walk on chalk line for what I'm about to say because I understand it's before the courts, but looking back at the issue with the procurement process, where in essence it was clear that there was a breakdown between the basic segregation of duties between the person who ordering the goods, the person receiving the goods, and the person who paying for the goods should be separate. I'm curious now, with the size of your department or your responsibilities, how does that basic segregation of those 3 functions operate outside of the operations department?
Just to clarify, do you mean the actual ordering and receiving of the goods per department? Or?
Yeah, well, it is my understanding, the reason we end up, why we have the problem that we have, I think this is public knowledge, is that we basically bought goods, or we paid for goods that we basically had never received. And I'm just trying to figure out where along the line could we have, like the finance department would have paid for something, but no one confirmed that they actually didn't receive it. And so I'm just trying to understand what process is in place now, because generally those are different functions somewhere along the line. In small organization, you may have 2 people doing one of the roles, but you very rarely would find all 3. So I'm trying to figure out now, just seeing what had happened before and the lessons learned. I mean, what processes or procedures are in place now to make sure that those 3 functions are actually verified and someone is there accounting for it?
So in each of our revenue departments, the person ordering the goods cannot receive them. Or if they do receive them, because of a small staff such as food and beverage, they have to have a second person actually receiving the goods with them. So there's the ordering process, and of course it can only be from an approved vendor. If it's a new vendor, it has to have a trade and business license. So the purchase order is raised, then when the goods are received, it's received either by themselves and another person or 2 totally different people. And for most levels of authority, for all retail purchases, for example, there has to be the approval of the Chief Marketing and Merchandising Officer along with the retail store manager. So there's always, we try to keep the 2 sets of eyes policy on every step of the process in procurement and cash.
Yeah, but thanks very much for that. Looking at the issue of the Turtle Center itself, where it appears that a lot of the breakdown generally comes about from collusion, which is very difficult to sometimes audit. Those 2 eyes, are they from 2 different departments, or are they from the same department?
If they're receiving goods, it is from the same department, but when it comes to the accounts department then, there is a different set of eyes then that look at it. The accounts payable person makes sure that the invoice is there, the receiving slip is there with signed signatures, and the purchase order is all received before she will send it for processing. And then we have the accounts officer who then looks at it and puts together the payment batch. So then it's a different person looking at it to see, if everything is in order, to make sure the accounts payable person didn't do anything that they should or missed anything. And then the finance manager, Sean, he also looks at it before it goes through. And then I also review it as well. If there's an electronic payment batch and there's a batch that's sent, we started that process over COVID because of the lockdown, so we got rid of checks. And then there's a batch sent, and then I review it and I check the backup as well. And then when it goes to electronic signatures, then the CEO and another A signature, which is another board member, also has to review it and sign off on it.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Now, that sounds good on paper, and it sounds good in theory, it sounds good in practice. But unfortunately, the Turtle Center issue is that is not what has happened. And that is what we're trying to figure out in terms of where the breakdown was. Now, I do recognize that some of these things happened before your arrival, but I also recognize that some of the weakness or the people who were asleep at the wheel are still there. So the end of the day, so while you may have brought a fresh set of eyes and fresh energy, the reality is some of the culprits in the past, where the incompetence was in the past, is still there. And I'm trying to figure out what process or procedures that you put in to basically safeguard against what has happened, because we have had in the past, going back to managing directors giving themselves pay increases without board approval. I mean, anyone else do that, that's called theft someplace else. I mean, so it has been that kind of history throughout. And like I said, unfortunately, I mean, you have come aboard in an organization that's plagued with a lot of these deficiencies and shortcomings. So, and what we're looking for, at least what I'm looking for, is the change in the culture. So while I recognize that you would have brought something new to the process and new to the procedures, there is that underlying culture that we need to make sure isn't still there at this point. And that's what we're trying to flush out from this committee.
Thank you for that. I guess the way I see it is that we're on a journey of continuous improvement, and that's my mission, is to continuously improve all internal controls, try to get it so that hopefully one day we won't be reliant on EI subsidies or injections. Everything we put in place, it's reviewed, it's monitored. I check the GL accounts. We have a checklist now which wasn't in place before for every month end. So every person knows the part they have to play and the accounts they have to reconcile. And then I'm responsible as well for making sure all those steps are completed. And then I have the final review of all the monthly accounts before they're sent to the Board of Directors. I also attend the Board of Directors meeting to answer any questions that they might have on any accounts, any anomalies, anything that they want to question me on.
In your role, I mean, having been there now a little over 2 years, what is it you see as the biggest risk items that would probably keep you awake at night?
The ones that did keep me awake at night, I think, have now been resolved. So,
Okay, and what are those, if you don't mind me asking, just for clarity?
just from what you've read in the annual report, it's the cash anomalies and the procurement irregularities. So, of course, I came in January 2018, and the cash was discovered within a couple of weeks of when I started. So it's just those were the things that kept me up, and making sure the internal controls were in place. And while I don't think we're finished, because I think continuous improvement is just that, it's continuous, and I'll never be satisfied. I just want to continue to improve the internal controls. So I sleep a lot better at night knowing that I'm doing everything we can to continue to point the company in the right direction and have a culture of accountability is what I'm trying to help instill.
One of the things that kind of jumped on my radar with regards to the whole weaknesses in the finance function, and I will just address them as weaknesses, is that this was one of the entities that was actually audited by an outside entity. And it is my understanding that the person who was actually in charge of finance previously worked for the outside entity that was auditing them. And I am wondering now, bearing in mind, like, are we now looking at that to make sure that the persons that we have in finance aren't from the same background as the people who are basically auditing? Because these are the kind of independence issues that, popped up, and it's one of the things that I can tell you that some feedback that I've received from people who previously on the board was they were very uncomfortable with that relationship from that standpoint. So I'm curious in terms of what is being done now in terms of to safeguard against those kind of issues.
I'm assuming you're referring to the prior CFO, and again, he was gone before I started, and I'm aware of his connection with an auditing firm. For myself, I guess it's just because I have oversight of finance. I am a chartered professional accountant. I have a Bachelor of Commerce co-op. I've got a lot of years of general management experience. I ran a hotel for 5.5 years, so 148-room hotel with 3 F&B outlets. I was a director of finance and human resources for an airport authority, and my last position before moving from my island, which is Newfoundland in the middle of the Atlantic, to this nice warm island in the middle of the Caribbean, was regional director for our Newfoundland and Labrador housing, which is affordable and public housing. So I'm quite familiar with provincial government and federal government laws and authorities. You know, Canada is very much under the British system, so I'm familiar with that. So from that point of view, I can only speak to my qualifications and what I bring and my experience, and I can't comment. I came up through the certified management accountant route, and then, of course, Canada had a whole merger of the charter provincial accountants. So I have a great deal not only of accounting, but extensive executive and management experience as well.
I'm looking at the Deloitte plan that was sent through with regards to the number of FTEs in terms of they have an amount, I think 92 or something, that was considered within their structure. But I noticed at the end of 2019, I think we had like 108 or something, which is 16 above what was Deloitte recommended. In terms of the actual optimum level of employees and to get to that max efficiency, I'm curious in terms of where do you see eventually that the FTE counts need to be, because there's a big jump between 92 versus 108. I mean, that's, quite up there. And I'm trying to figure out what is driving that growth in the FTE count to be well above what the professional recommendation was.
Okay, right now we have 98 employees, so we're sliding backwards. But from my understanding, a lot of the additions are from just the growth in the tourism sector. So we needed more people with tours, more dispatchers on the piers because of the coordination that goes on there, as well as F&B. Then we've had more events, and we're trying to streamline more events and open more outlets to increase the revenue. So it's more on the revenue generation side. On the education, because we're conservation and education, we did add a position of education programs officer, which is under the curator who's responsible for that, because it's just, again, wanted to focus on the education piece. And then there were some other restructuring changes as we went along. And of course, the accounts officer, that was well needed in the finance team. But with regards to a perfect number, we're still working our way through that because of this whole COVID-19. And we're doing a ton of cross-training. Everybody's really pitching in and helping out wherever we can. So until, I guess, we figure out what the new tourism levels will look like, I don't think we can really answer that question yet.
No problem. I noticed between 2018 and 2019, in 2018, the total advertisement spend was just over $339,000. And by 2019, it had actually dropped by over 60,000 to 207, well, just under 279,000. I'm just curious in terms of what was the thinking or the strategic direction in terms of dropping, the advertisement by at least 18%. Sorry, that's on page 46 of your 2019 report and page 35 of your 2018 report.
While I'm not responsible for that, because it's under the Chief Marketing and Merchandising Officer's portfolio, from my understanding, we had a change in personnel, so we had an acting Chief Marketing Officer. The restructure came the Chief Marketing and Merchandising Officer, and then we had a marketing manager. So the marketing manager, the new person that came on board, most of the reductions was through looking at all the contracts that were previously signed and getting ones that she felt at the time that were not getting return on investment. So really trying to streamline and get the return on investment for the advertising spend.
Okay, thank you very much. And I noticed the retail operating expense actually went up between 2018 and 2019, and you said that was one of the one of the areas that's actually paying for itself. So, is it fair to assume that the increase in cost was pretty much? I know it's not personal cost because that's accounted for separately, but I'm just trying to figure out what normally would go inside the retail operating expense line that would have driven the cost up that much. Is it merchandise or I don't know? I'm just trying to figure out what goes there.
It was a change in product mix and merchandise in 2018.
Okay.
Getting back to the restructuring at the top, right? Unfortunately, we asked the CEO to send us a copy of the Deloitte report. What he has sent us is a draft of a report which is basically dealing with the organizational structure and organizational changes. Specifically, we were looking for the rationale for combining CFO and COO, etc. But the question I want to ask you, was this restructuring done on this draft report or was it done on a final report? Because his email indicates that he don't know whether you all got a final report or not.
Again, all of that was concluded before I started that restructuring. Okay. So that was a decision made in 2017, and from my understanding, I was the first hire of that restructure.
Okay. So you haven't seen the Deloitte report. You're not operating from the recommendations made by Deloitte.
I have seen the report, yes.
Okay, is it a draft report or is it a final report? A report?
Mr. Adam is checking with Deloitte. I actually called them myself as well, and they were trying to remember if the one that's marked draft is actually the final. So they were trying to determine that.
This was done complimentary or what?
No.
Because
I just don't think that I don't know whether or not they actually sent one that was marked final, and I wasn't involved in that process, like I said that.
But from, you understand, my predicament is all of this could have changed in a final report. We don't know. And it is a little bit troubling to me that the board and the management of the Turtle Farm are implementing recommendations contained in a draft report, because you would expect that a draft report was a report that was submitted for management to to comment on, and then you go back and do a final report based on what management said it had the resources to implement what was there. So that's rather troubling. How many people were given this salary increase as an individual award?
It wasn't an individual award. It was based, every position was ranked in terms of the job evaluation committee that was formed and trained by the Deloitte consultants, and they were awarded points by the position, and then the individual within the position would have received a change in salary based on the new points in the new salary scale.
Because in my understanding of Section 48 of the Public Authorities Law, and I'm getting older than maybe, but I believe that Section 2 was only put in the law to allow government agencies to award increments within salary bands to individuals who had completed a year or got a special appraisement. I don't think it was ever intended to cater for large-scale top management restructuring and reassigning and reevaluation of positions. I believe that section that you would require ministry and cabinet approval for that kind of across-the-board adjustments. But we'll have to take that up with the legal people. But
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. The chairman just asked you how many, and once again you reverted back to saying individuals. Can we then say there was only a certain amount of people at the top that got these pay raise? Can we say that then? Since we're not going to discuss whether it was a group of people or individuals, but the people who got these pay raise was at the top.
No, it was all levels of the organization.
Okay. Can we say that as a COO, you have oversight for HR?
Correct.
And you have oversight for IT?
Correct.
And then you also chair the, as you said just now, the Procurement Committee?
The entity Procurement Committee, yes.
Yeah, okay. The CEO was here earlier on, and we're trying to get to, he said something about, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chair, through you, it was seven, what was the seven, it was seven, what was the chair, the CEO said that it was seven, no, it was seven things that they gave him a choice.
referring to the conditions under which people were paid during COVID, and that they were given 7 options.
Can you list those 7 options for us, please?
I'd have to think about it at the top of my head. I don't have them wrote down. This is
Oh,
in
so
relation to the
You
whether
can
or
give-
not.
you can just to be safe, you can submit them in writing.
Yes.
By email to.
Okay, will
Okay,
do.
thank you, Mr. Chair. But through you, Mr. Chair, was one of those, was the people told that they had to take their vacation and get paid for it or something during the COVID time?
That was one of the 7 ways if they chose to take annual leave or personal leave or whatever leave applied at the time.
Jefferson,
They had
you
a
listening?
choice.
You listening?
Just 1 second.
As
I
one
want
of
the
the
chair,
7
I want
ways.
1 second, please. I want you to repeat that so the chairman can hear it. Yes, ma'am. Could you go ahead, please? Repeat that, please.
That was one of the 7 ways in which they could earn hours, was to take their paid leave, which is in the form of annual vacation or their personal leave or any other leave that was applicable to them and their circumstances, as approved by their line manager.
I just want, did anyone take that option?
Yes, there were several.
Okay.
They were not given much choice.
When they were given that option, were they required to make an application for leave?
Through their line manager, not all of them had access to Lightworks, which is our timekeeping system, because normally you have to go into Lightworks and apply. We did work with our providers to get it to a point that it was an app on your phone that you could do. So once the ones that could access it did so during the process. If they didn't, they did a request through their line manager.
Okay. But I don't know how to say this now. Yeah.
Okay. When there is a position, there's a job description for it. I got the two different samples here. How often do you all change a job description to suit someone, or what would cause you to change a job description? You have John Doe working as a server. What would cause, suddenly you decide you're going to release John Doe, but you change the job description to fit someone else coming in? Does this happen, and has it happened?
To my knowledge, during my time being involved in recruitment, I'm not aware of it happening, and the only time the job description is changed is when we revisited and are missing components of which now the portfolio of the civil service require. There's certain components that need to be in each job description contained there, so we do that. And if we decide to restructure, which we've done on different occasions based on the needs of the business, and a new job description needs to be created, that job description then goes to the Job Evaluation Committee, of which I think there's like 6 or 7 members. Each one of them has a voice to score each of the components with regards to the job evaluation training that they all undertook. And then it's a consensus to arrive at the amount of points for any new job description, and then that determines the salary scale. So there is a complete process that we do.
And last but not least, I've heard you repeat over and over about training these people in different positions to be able to do this. Has there been any, I'm going to use a diplomatic word, sensitivity training, that when you top people talk to the people below, that there's not a bullying element to the way you deal with the staff? Is there anything been to show you all that, or to show you how to do it, and how to take in consideration that as the CEO or some of the people that's been hired down at the bottom are people that there's a special way or there's a right way to talk to those type of people?
We don't have a specific policy on how to talk to people. We do, are against any type of bullying activity. We do have access to Degreed, which is the online program that the civil service uses for all their training. And we have made those courses mandatory for all new employees, the anti-fraud and, the different ones that speak to what you just spoke to. We've also implemented a conflict resolution policy, so if there's 2 people in conflict, there's a whole chain of command of how it's resolved, all the way up to the chair of the board. So I'm not aware of anything, I have an open door policy, so I've got lots of conversations, and if there is an issue, then we follow the right protocol and try to get it resolved.
And if the staff has a problem they can't resolve with yourself, who would they go to above you?
They would go to the CEO.
Okay. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Not to leave you out, Mr. Glidden, as a finance manager, the CEO this morning indicated that you're now the person responsible for the cash balances and bank reconciliations. You want to take us through the processes that you use to ensure that they are accurate?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. At the current way that we are doing it, and the processes that the COO, Ms. Peggy, has stated, is that we have now hired an accounts officer who performs the bank reconciliations, and then I review those bank reconciliations to ensure that they are done in a timely manner and properly. So the processes that we have in place now are that, as Ms. Peggy has stated, the COO, is that we have 2 sets of eyes on everything, which we didn't previously, and we were also with my department was short a staff member to be able to do that function. And with the hire of the accounts officer, we now have that capability of having 2 sets of eyes on everything and every process that we have in place.
what documentation do you require to substantiate the cash balances? Or you just add up you just check the figures?
We have several things that we utilize. We have the cash out reports that are done on a daily basis that are reconciled by the accounts receivable officer and then double checked by the accounts officer. I review those reports to ensure that they are signed. All deposits that are going to the bank are signed off by me. I ensure that the reports that are the daily cash that have been collected, I review those reports to see what the sales report states and the amount of cash that is being deposited. I sign those reports now.
And all of those you're satisfied that there is sufficient documentation, whether it's a point of sale or whatever, that accompanies the cash to you are accurate and can't be altered and tampered with before you review them?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The current reports.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The reports that we have do give us the detail of what the cash should be, and it's then matched actually to the deposit slips themselves that are actually sent off to the bank. So that's what I'm actually signing off. I actually sign off to verify, and I look at the deposit slips myself and the cash and verify that they are equal to the report and that they are then placed into the bag that is sent off to the bank.
On your point of sales, how often do you do an inventory check to determine that the number of items that say have been sold are correct, and that they're not other items that they're gone out of the inventory but they're not, you don't have a sales sheet from? Do you do those kind of checks and balance checks on a regular basis as well?
We also do those. We do a spot check on inventory on a monthly basis. We also do a spot check on the cash, their cash registers. We spot check cash, basically the cashier's floats on a regular basis. Now we spot check that. We spot check inventory for retail, and also we spot check the inventory for food and beverage. And those reports then are done. And then we also do a inventory count as well, more often than just once a year.
Does your point of sales item adjust your inventory according to sales, or how do you spot check your inventory against your sales?
We do a spot check based on the items that we are selected at random, and then we do a spot check on the inventory of those items. Or if you're asking if the reports show the items that are sold, yes, we have a report that can show the items that have been sold, and then we can also then reconcile those back to the sales as well. If that's what you're asking, Mr. Chairman.
When you say you spot check certain items, how do you select those items, and are they rotated to ensure that all items are checked at least weekly, or because you could just be not checking the right item and $200,000 has been sold in that month and you would know?
No, Mr. Chair. What we do is we do the item itself that we select are at random. So those items, I look for high dollar items, that we spot check more often than the lower end items. And so with the number of items that we have in inventory, Mr. Chairman, is that those items would be very difficult to check every item unless we do a full inventory count.
I don't have a quorum. Okay, Mr. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I can fully understand the HR process. Just looking at page 58 of the 2019 report, I noticed the staff turnover was 19.4% for 2018 and 18.7% for 2019. And the CEO, in his previous testimony, was given a breakdown in terms of termination and natural attrition and redundancy and everything else. I'm just curious from a HR management standpoint, what do you find to be the biggest issue with regards to maintaining or keeping staff? Because this is actually quite high in terms of turnover.
Our turnover has been high in 2018 and 2019, and there is a combination of terminations and voluntary resignations. The terminations are either due to failure to perform or misconduct issues, and I think that attributes to the, I'll call her new HR manager, but she's been there since August 2018, of really instilling the disciplinary process and having all managers understand that it's not a negative thing, it's meant to teach, and really getting the message out there of doing the proper discipline and going all the way of all the channels, and also, making sure that people are held accountable for if they're not fully performing their role, to have those conversations and implement discipline if necessary. So part of that turnover is, I think, a stronger HR disciplinary accountability culture, and then the resignations are just through, people leaving to go to different companies or their own private reasons for their own, work-life balance or what have you.
In terms of performance evaluation, how regularly are those done?
On a formal basis, they're done semi-annually. But we encourage all managers, to have the weekly meetings, to have the monthly chats. Some of them, like food and beverage and retail, they have their daily lineups, so they have quick chats with everybody, to start off the day. So we're trying to increase the communication.
And in terms of stuff like salary increases, what is the process for an employee to receive a salary increase?
It has to be stated as one of the reasons in our pay policy guide that was approved by the board.
Yeah, okay, so how is the recommendation made? Is it made via the manager or is it
Yes.
made?
Oh, sorry, yes, there is a salary recommendation form that we use. So the starting point would be the line manager putting the justification on the form. If that's approved, then it gets sent to their executive, and then their level of approval, then it goes to the HR manager, then it goes to me, and then it goes to the CEO.
Okay, and in the event, let's say, for example, the CEO was to get a salary increase, what is the process for that?
The proper process for his salary increase is to go to the board. The chair would have to bring it forward to the board.
Okay, and have there been any salary increases in 29 at the senior management level?
Yes.
Okay, and those salary increases were all approved by the board?
There is a matter that is not enclosed in here that we've been in consultation with our auditors, and we're currently in the process of rectifying. So I'd rather
Okay.
not comment on that because it's not contained in any of these annual reports.
Well, unfortunately, in this committee, it doesn't work like that. I hate to disappoint you. And the reason why I raised that issue is that in the past, we had a managing director at the Turtle Center give himself a pay increase without any board approval, and that person ended up being, was he terminated or did he resign? Which was it? No, he had actually resigned. He had resigned. Yeah, but it came out, it was a big issue back then. So recognizing that we have had that issue before in the past where the managing director gave himself a pay increase without board approval, I am wondering now if, and this is why we do have these meetings, we now find ourselves back in a similar situation where there have been increases at a management level without board approval.
I am aware that there were increases given without board approval, but under the remit of the pay policy guide, which was approved by the board. There was a misunderstanding by a member of the HR department of how to give an increase. It was a misunderstanding of a certain section of that pay policy guide, and that has since been addressed. But I am not aware of ever the managing director or CEO giving himself an increase.
But going back then to the sign-off process, because what you just explained a while ago is that any of these pay increases would be signed off to the, by the CEO. So I am curious now, with regards to the CEO, he would have signed off his own pay increase?
No, he would not have. That would have went to the board. And
Okay.
there was some issue around that as well, just with the proper form.
Yeah, but then going back to your earlier testimony then, if that is the process that your team have in place to process any pay increases, then the question is, could that payment have been processed without all of those requisite documents being signed?
Yes, but was subsequently found and addressed and rectified.
Long before it was discovered? How many months?
It depends on which, some was in a matter of 2 months.
You see,
And
one of
some
the,
were
Prior
6
to
months.
that,
sorry,
And some were 6 months.
some were 6 months. Well, the culmination of all that
you see,
was found.
I
and
can tell
addressed.
exactly where my line of question is coming from, is that it is the concept of doing away with the corporate snitch, which is the CFO, which normally there's a board finance subcommittee that the CFO would sit on. And the CFO has been the check and balance between the CEO and the COO within the whole C-suite environment. Now, the CEO as yourself, and I do understand that from people who have interacted with you, they've actually found you to be the exact words you're going to use is switched on, which is actually complimentary for where we're coming from. They basically speak highly of you from a professional standpoint. But at the same time, as I said, I do recognize that you have inherited an organization with a culture that is quite embedded. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that that corporate snitch is now missing. And the reason why it's even a bigger problem for me is that the previous corporate snitch that should have been doing his job as a corporate snitch didn't do it. And that is missing. And the one major share role of the Turtle Center is still the Cayman Islands government, and in essence, the Cayman Islands people, and which we're exercising through this committee here today. And what I'm trying to root out or get to the bottom of is when that culture is leaving the Turtle Center. And that's what I'm looking for, because if it is a situation where the CEO basically got a pay increase without the board approval, then that is a major problem, because that is one of the things why the Public Authorities Law was brought into, because many of these government entities were going crazy in terms of some of the salaries and the processes and everything else. And what I would like from the Auditor General here today is I would very much like to know if there were any pay increases to senior management team, and to basically have that looked at separately, because I do have serious concerns with regards to the governance, and I would hate to know that the CEO or anyone else on the chief level received salary increases without board approval, because that, I'm going to tell you, is something that requires a whole different conversation with a different set of people that is from the legal background, because that cannot happen and that cannot fly, not in this day and age. And that is what I need to make sure, because it is that culture that we have at the Turtle Farm that why this entity is actually here today. And it is that governance issue. Now, like I said, I do recognize that you have inherited a culture that unfortunately is there before you. And you're just one person basically trying to skate uphill in terms of an organization with a lot of different governance issues. And that's the reason why we wanted to have this conversation today, because some of the deeper conversations I have, or the questions, has to be done at the board level, and ultimately that's where we'll take it from. But like I said, we'll deal with that tomorrow,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, through you. Can you advise this committee that now what is being done to help the staff that have to deal with now that they don't have any gratuities coming in, that they're taking home practically nothing? Is there anything being done to help those staff?
We already pay well above the minimum wage for the ones that would receive gratuities, which are the servers. And so, they're being paid over $11 an hour, where most in the industry are $6 or less. So yes, there is a gap right now with their gratuities, but what we're trying to do is try to have as many events and try to introduce new things that people want to come to so that their gratuities will at least be increased as much as we can with the guests that we have.
I have one question. A while ago, you said that those salary increases was a mistake made by the HR person. Has that adjustment in their salaries been made? In other words, have they had to pay back the salaries that they inadvertently got by somebody's mistake?
The board is dealing with it on the board level, so we brought it to the board's attention. This was something that was, I don't like to call I'm sorry, but I disagree, I guess, with the corporate snitch. My philosophy is more oversight of deficiencies in internal controls. So I still see myself with that role. So that was something that I discovered that wasn't done quite the way it should have been. This was brought to the CEO's attention, brought to the board attention, so it's handled at the board level.
Certainly, that's not a matter for the board. The CEO should be able to tell the staff, even if it includes him, that you got this unintended salary increase, shall we say, or this mistaken salary increase for X number of months. I'm sorry, but you had to pay it back, and maybe we'll give you, don't take it all from in one lump sum, but we'll give it back to you over the scene, whether it was a 2-month period you got it or a 6-month period. But what decision is the board going to make on that, to grant it retroactively? Is that what's being recommended to the board?
I'd prefer if you spoke to the board on
Oh,
that.
they're coming tomorrow, ma'am, trust me.
Yes. Okay, so I prefer if you leave it with them. I just know it was brought to the board level,
Okay,
and there was full disclosure on the issue.
okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Peggy Hamilton. We really appreciate your forthrightness, and we wish you luck in trying to get the necessary controls put in place in that environment that Mr. Chris just referred to. And also, we want to thank you, Mr. Glidden, for coming in by Zoom, and we wish you all, and God bless you all until we meet again. The committee is adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. 10.